Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. Diane Francis has joined me tonight. She is well known to, I think, probably all of us as an author, a columnist with the National Post, a frequent commentator on what's going on economically and politically in Canada and beyond. And I wanted to ask her about this controversy in regards to Canada and the United States doing something. It started with Donald Trump saying we're the 51st state and calling our prime minister governor, and then Kevin O'Leary is saying he's off to Mar-a-Lago to negotiate a merger. You actually several years ago, Ms. Francis, wrote a book on this topic, and I think I've commented a couple of times recently in articles. Tell me what you think of this whole controversy. Does it make any sense? Is it crazy? Is it traitorous for Kevin to go to Mar-a-Lago and start negotiating? What do you think?
No, not at all. Listen, here's the way I feel about it is that it is a perennial issue as long as the two countries have been in existence. There have been prominent people that have raised the possibility of some kind of full or partial merger in the past, including Mackenzie King, who was the wartime prime minister of Canada and prime minister through the Depression and the whole thing. I mean, he was one of the longest serving prime ministers, and he talked and toyed with the idea and the concept of after the Second World War, when the US and Canada were the only two economies left standing in the developed world, that maybe we should just get together because we got along so well as allies in the war effort. Anyway, he didn't do anything about it. And, it's not that easy. And I don't know what he was talking about and what his concept was. But I wrote a book in 2013 called Merger of the Century. And basically, I predicted that this kind of scenario would start to raise its head because Canada was down a path of poor leadership, political dysfunction, separation, vis-a-vis Quebec and the disdain for Western Canada and parts of the country and all of that sort of thing. And the fact that our leadership hasn't been exactly the best. And so I said, we would find ourselves in a vulnerable position. And that, we really, unless we become, and I said this was what should happen, unless we start to pull up our bootstraps and become a strong country. And that includes having a military and being able to protect your own borders, which we cannot do. And I would say a place that can't protect its own borders is not sovereign. And we know the Americans protect our borders for us for nothing. And so all these things I pointed out in 2013, I said, let's preemptively look at what we could do. Not that I anticipated or thought that the Americans would be interested in grabbing us. That's not their style. They're a democratic nation. They don't conquer other countries. They just don't do that. And they really like Canada. And they really don't kind of they don't think of it as a foreign country. They think of it as another country. So I looked at all these different merger models. And one of the things that I pointed out in a piece I wrote on Substack was, and I've told O'Leary this as well, to even joke, which Trump did, about us becoming a 51st state, which it was a joke. It was a smart ass comment. It speaks volumes about his ignorance concerning what Canada is. But, I think a lot of Canadians don't understand, and a lot of the world doesn't understand what we've got up here. And to call us a 51st state is insulting. Canada geographically is as big as the 50 states. Okay, a lot of it's wasteland and so on, and very cold and inhospitable. But in terms of resources, Canada has as many, probably more resources than the 50 US states. So it's not a state. And to even say that we should be a state is very insulting and really quite ignorant. Canada, if anything, would be a more or less equal partner. And in my book in 2013, for fun, I worked with an investment banker and we did a corporate merger model based on a big company and a little company. A big company in many ways being the United States, a little company, Canada, but with big assets. So how do you value these two things? How would you merge them? And we actually did the work. We looked at all of the assets, fossil fuels, forest, water, arable farmland, all kinds of stuff we looked at in both countries based on the CIA World Factbook. And we compared them like you would two companies that are looking at getting together. And guess what?
What?
Guess what?
We got a
Canada
premium.
has $17 trillion more in natural and geological resources than does the United States, equivalent to $500,000 per person in Canada as an overcontribution. So I did this and I said, hey, okay, if you wanted to merge fully and the Americans wanted to take us over, I had to pay everybody $500,000 plus free health care for the rest of their lives to make it interesting.
You
And their
think Canadians would accept the $500,000?
I don't think so. I don't know. They also wouldn't really fancy being part of that dysfunctional Washington mess. And they really don't fancy, the social problems that they'd inherit. And they certainly would not want to give up their medical system, which is far superior than the Americans and half the price. So, there's a lot of things, but I just did it as a thought experiment. I said, let's just get this straight. This country is enormously wealthy. And, it should be bigger economically than it is, but for bad management. And that may change.
So, in your merger model, typically the smaller company would sell it at a significant premium to what it's trading at. You talk about $500,000 as being per person, the actual amount. But the reality is, from a people standpoint, we're 1/10 the size. We're less than California. We're equal to about 2/3 of the size of California. So, do we deserve more than 2 senators and just one state?
Well, the assets are equivalent.
So you do this merger on assets, not on people.
We could be one state, but my God, it would have to have as much clout as nearly 50. If you look at the asset part. Of course, then you also have to take into consideration the difference in the GDP, which we did, by the way, in this exercise. I mean, the book is fascinating. It wasn't read because nobody in the Canadian media except the Toronto Star would review it because they thought it was treasonous. They thought it was disgusting. And of course, I'm a rival, media-wise. And I was put on I did a really lengthy interview with Myriad Tremonte on the CBC radio. Great interview, hour and a half. And after that, I was blacklisted from the CBC, from going to being on it regularly on radio and TV to never being on it again. So that was the price I paid for telling the truth. And that was, Canada, you're pretty weak. You better smarten up because you're really not going very far without the help of the Americans. And think about some kind of a merger that would benefit both of you, or a partial merger, or an economic union, which is what I came down to as the best solution. And that is to do a European Union style economic union just with the two countries, not Mexico. Mexico can't be part of it. And just with the two countries. And then you'd reap all kinds of benefits, both countries, by doing that. And, the European Union has done it with 32 countries that hate each other. Why can't we do it with two countries that like each other?
Well, I think the issue on that, I think it's worth a longer conversation, but the issue on that is that right now, obviously Trump and numerous other people within his orbit don't believe that Canada protects our borders such that people coming into our country would have far freer access to the United States. And he's demanding, far stronger, more stringent protection of our borders, and whether that be from migrants or illegal aliens or from fentanyl coming in from China, or the ingredients for fentanyl, correct?
Absolutely. I've been writing about this for years. The only one in Canada. We don't have a border protection. We don't have security because of these people in Ottawa. The 10 years of awful government. And, immigration, if you don't screen people and you just open the floodgates and then you give everybody a free health card, you're asking for trouble. So now we have about 2 million unidentified aliens, mostly in Vancouver and Toronto. And goodness knows they don't get deported. They are moving across the border, many of them, upsetting the Americans. We don't know what they're up to. So the point is, we don't have security. We're not a real country unless we can guard ourselves. So what Trump has been saying for a long time, and what economic merger union, an economic union would do, like they have in Europe, is you'd have an overriding binational governance system, and Canada would be paying its fair share of what the Americans spend guarding the entire perimeter of Canada, which we don't do.
But, in Europe, clearly the UK, but also France and numerous other countries have had real difficulty with giving up sovereignty to Brussels. Would the United States and the free trade agreement had real difficulty giving up any kind of even small, sovereignty to a free trade agreement. Would the United States agree to any kind of political situation where they're giving up any of their 100% complete rights, their sovereignty into an economic union kind of Brussels structure?
Canada isn't doing a reverse takeover. We're not taking over parts or all of the United States.
No, but the EU, Brussels, really has influence over.
Our European Union is not political. A European Union is a business arrangement. It's a very smart business arrangement. But by the way, before you do that, you have to have you go through steps. You go to a customs union where you erase the border for trade and investment purposes, which we have virtually. But then you go to a monetary union. That's tricky. Then you go to an economic union. Now, what you have to do to have a customs union is you have to protect the perimeter, the entire perimeter of the two countries, or else you're going to have people crossing that border that you don't want, that are coming in the back door. So what you've got to do is take that next step, and or do nothing, and that's fine too. That's an option.
We're having a great conversation with Diane Francis tonight about should Canada and the United States get closer together, and if so, in what form? We're going to take a break for some messages and be back with our very famous guest tonight in just 2 minutes. Stay with us, everybody. Back in 2. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. Diane Francis, National Post columnist, author, etc., and a well-known media personality, economic commentator, political commentator in Canada, is my guest tonight, talking about whether Canada and the United States should have a closer association. Ms. Francis, I did a thesis when I was at Harvard Business School on Canada-U.S. free trade. And it was interesting because, it was right around that 1988 election where there were a lot of heated arguments on both sides. And John Turner, the leader of the Liberal Party at the time, was adamant that this would be the first step toward a U.S. takeover if we actually entered into the free trade agreement. Was he right that the free trade agreement was the first step?
It hasn't been. It's been 1988. We're not being taken over. We're not even talking about it. What I'm talking about is the next sensible step, which is a European Union economic union, an economic union.
So not the EU that has the political ramifications, just an economic union.
It does. Everybody has their own country and their own sovereignty and their own language and their own politics, and they come together at an overriding regulatory body in Brussels called the European Union. It's all about business. They don't have an armed force. They each have now, and also remember, there are 3 nuclear powers in Europe. There are 2, sorry, France and Britain. And so, it's a pretty protected jurisdiction from many points, and they all have their own militaries, and they're pretty powerful, particularly the ones in the north. And we have a north, and we have 300 people up there. It's a joke.
So a customs union is something that I think a lot of people actually might support. I think that the idea about traveling across the border, not having to stop at customs, being able to take duty-free goods across the border, both from a business standpoint as well as a personal standpoint, being able to go to New York and work, and so free movement of labor, free movement of capital. I think a lot of people would have some understanding of that. But what Trump is talking about, a 51st state, takes it a whole step farther.
Trump is joking. It's not 51st state material. It's a 50-50 partner material in terms of resources. That's the whole point. Look.
But so maybe that's the response that O'Leary or Trudeau should have.
I know Donald Trump. I grew up in the U.S. I live in New York part-time. He's a New York smartass. He's a tough guy. He likes to trash talk the other boys. So when Trudeau goes down there and whines like a puppy that, oh, you can't put tariffs on us because it'll ruin us. He says, well, maybe you should just become the 51st state. It was in response to the whining by a prime minister who has no idea about business, who's weakened the country. And, instead of what he should have done is go to Mar-a-Lago and say, okay, we get it. We have a huge trade surplus over you. Okay, we will try and reduce that. You are protecting us militarily. Okay, we will pay for that. And then you have no problem. But no, he doesn't do that.
So negotiate. You say that you know how to deal with New York guys. Some people say the only way to stand up to a bully is to stand up. Did Doug Ford take the right stance, saying we'll shut off power to 1.5 million people in Michigan?
Retaliation is stupid when you're the little guy. And the next thing is, I think Doug Ford's a terrific leader. But I'll tell you, when you start to threaten people that you will cut off their supplies, you get off the list of supplier. That's a very deep slope you're starting to go down. That's very dangerous. And, the premier of Alberta, Danielle, said it much better. We're not retaliating, but if you put a tax on oil, you're just going to pay it, and that doesn't make a lot of sense for anybody. And she would never say, "Oh, we're going to cut off our oil to America." Then you get the troops. Because America is very dependent on Canadian oil imports. And
can I ask you a little bit more?
I'm not saying that we're held hostage. Right now, it's friendly and it's nice. I think the next step is to get somebody in the government, get a government that understands business and economics, and negotiate stuff with the guy.
So just on oil alone, can I ask you about that? We sell oil and natural gas to the United States at, I understand, something like 80% of market prices, world market prices. And the reason why is because we don't have great ways of getting that product elsewhere around the globe as of yet. And so we do sell at a discount. So if we're already in a negotiated agreement with the United States with different purchasers selling at 80% below world prices, if they slap a tax on it, why wouldn't we end up having to reduce our price even more? Because they're only willing to pay 80% already, and we have to agree to that. So by quickly saying that they're going to pay more, I'd like to believe that, but I worry that no, it'll end up being Canada having to discount our prices.
Look, here's the problem. It's Canada. It's not their fault that we only have one customer, that we overwhelmingly only have one customer for our oil. They just finished a pipeline to British Columbia. You know how many years it took people like me and people in Calgary to fight for that? Years. And then Trudeau was forced into doing it, putting up some money. And that's only 800,000 barrels a day. It helps. But how about an east-west pipeline through Quebec to the East Coast? Refineries, replace all the foreign oil. We can't get that done.
Because our Prime Minister said there wasn't a business case for that?
Because Quebec won't allow it. Canadians have not been smart about, in fact, not smart about getting alternate customers and about putting infrastructure in place to do that. It's our own fault.
Didn't the Prime Minister say there wasn't a business case for it?
As if he knows business case. Of course, there's a business case for it. He said that to Japan, to Spain, and to Germany when they wanted to build LNG export plants on the west and east coast of Canada. Guess what? Those countries went to Australia. The plants are already built. That's a year ago. He's an idiot when it comes to trade and business. He does not know, and he's very biased against, certain commodities. And he's just not a leader.
So our prosperity is down dramatically. Our productivity versus the United States is something like 40%, and it was equal about a decade ago. Our real median income has been flat for 10 or 15 years. What's gone wrong in Canada? You say that we've got all these resources. We are this rich country in resources. Why haven't we been able to do a better job with these assets that we've got?
Trudeau has blocked resource development. He's blocked all kinds of things that would have enhanced our economy. He's also flooded us with immigrants, millions, who are not screened and are not educated for the most part, who just become an overhead because everybody gets a free health card when they come in. So they have gone to two cities, principally, driven up housing prices, overwhelmed the healthcare systems for other Canadians in those two cities. And I don't know what they do for a living. They came in as students, they disappear, we don't deport. Or or their family reunification, and they don't have skills we need. Now, we have brought in skilled labor, but if you talk to everybody in the industry of Canada, they've been screaming to Ottawa to encourage and, entice immigrants with the skills that are needed, and nothing changes. That's why.
The lack of investment over immigration. How do we change it?
Well, I think you should strategically select immigrants to fill the needs that you have in the economy, rather than the companies having to move to the US to get those needs met.
So we do that, and I've interviewed people that are expert on our immigration system, and UK, Australia, New Zealand actually think Canada's got one of the best immigration systems, and frankly, in the US Republican primaries, some of the primary candidates, including Vivek, were talking about how Canada's immigration system was better than the United States. That said,
it was better until Trudeau came in. It was better because of a book I wrote, and a lot of the campaigning many of us did, that required a very good screening process. And it was based on job skills and job availability and, all of those sorts of things. I mean, that was thrown out, and then floodgates opened. Now, Australia's immigration system is better than Canada's because they have point system, and they bring in people they need. And, they don't say that Canada's immigration system is better, believe me. The United States immigration system is a whole other issue. It's about Mexico and about a border and about cartels who are smuggling people and drugs into their country. It's an enormous problem. We don't have that. We have our government has voluntarily opened the floodgates without strategic smarts as to what these people could do to contribute to Canadian life right off the bat.
My understanding is that we do have a very good system, other than in temporary foreign workers and students and refugees. But it's interesting.
Refugees is different. To me, that's a form of aid. That's different. You have to take in refugees, real refugees. But the student visa scam is a huge problem, and there's 2.5 million of them.
Yeah. Interesting.
And by the way, their visas ran out, and they're not voluntarily going home. They're not going home.
I think that's one of the fallacies of the current proposals that say that our immigration is actually, or our population is going to decline. It assumes that we're going to be deporting people, and I doubt we are going to be deporting people. But of the people that come in via the point system, 20% of them leave within 3 years, and most of them go to the United States. So that's interesting. They're coming here with skills, with money, and for whatever reason, we don't integrate them, and then they also get accepted in the United States. And so we've got a brain drain from people that we tried to recruit to come to Canada. It's a real shame. So
that's been Canada's history. And that's New Zealand's problem with Australia. And that's Austria's problem with Germany. When you're the little guy next to the big powerhouse, you become the farm team for labor and tech and everything else, and raw materials. So one of the figures that I came across and published in 2013, and this was staggering, that in the 19th century, was it the 20th century? Anyway, for 100-year period up to about the Depression, as many people immigrated from Canada to the US as lived in Canada at the beginning of that period. They just go there because it's there, and it's got a more powerful economy.
what would happen with a customs union, do you think?
With a customs union, I don't think much would change. I don't think that much would change. And in fact, with a customs union, you could see a lot of Americans who say, you know what? I kind of like the society in Canada a little better. So I think I'm going to actually move myself and my operation there, and I'm going to do that. I mean, let's not discount that, the attractiveness of Canada to people. So I think that anyway, you don't just, people in a customs union don't just go here and there if they want to. There's also kinds of implications. Where are you going to pay taxes, and whose healthcare are you part of? You have to be a resident for tax purposes. So all those things would have to be worked out. The Europeans have worked it out.
Monetary union, do you think we should go to the US dollar?
If you go into an economic union, you have to have a monetary union. And yeah, you have to go into the US dollar. It's like catastrophic, much bigger than the Canadian dollar. And our dollar, by the way, is pegged to the US dollar. It goes up and down in tandem because of our interdependence. But the tricky part comes in the negotiations. What do you convert the Canadian dollar to the US dollar for? And I would submit that if that actually happened, Canadians should get a very healthy premium for their currency because of their natural resource base.
So par or more than par?
Oh God, no. More.
More than par. Even though we're at, what is it, less than 70 cents today?
In Germany, I know it was different because East Germany was a bankrupt ex-communist country. When West Germany merged economically and politically, but economically with East Germany, they did a swap. And if you had an East German mark, which was worth half of what a Deutschmark was worth, you got 1 for 1.
So instead of going down to Mar-a-Lago to have dinner, should our prime minister or our government be saying these are the terms that we would consider a customs union or a monetary union at? Should we negotiate from strength?
Trump did not open up a negotiation formally. He made a joke, which begs all these questions you and I are talking about and Canadians have talked about throughout their entire history. So, there's no deal in the offing. Now, what Kevin O'Leary said in various news outlets said he's going to go down to Mar-a-Lago and he's going to get an economic union going. Well, good luck. I don't know if he has that schlep. And of course, he doesn't necessarily take Canadians along with him. And not everybody, agrees with where he's at and so on and so forth. I think the only course of action for Canada is to grow up and be a grown-up country. Get rid of what we have in Ottawa now. Get a business-smart government in place. Build a military so we can be a truly sovereign country, or offer to the Americans to pay them billions every year to do the job for us. Okay? That's being a grown-up. And then fix the immigration situation, get taxes down, and I think the games will begin.
Business smart government, fund our military comparable to the United States, or at least up to our GDP, NATO demands of 2% of GDP, fix our border, and invest in Canada. Sounds like a good strategy.
And
Dan Francis,
we get the taxes down, the American bucks will come up. And
Dan Francis, thanks so much for joining us. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome. Enjoyed it.
We're going to take a break and come back, and I'm going to give you a little bit of my thinking on this topic and what I think should happen. Back in 2 minutes. Thank you, Diane. Appreciate it.
Great.